The Devils lost their first game in regulation for the 2023-2024 season against the Florida Panthers, the reigning Eastern Conference champions, by a score of 4-3. This game started off really ugly for the Devils and also seemed hopeless, but they mounted a decent comeback in period 3. Some things didn't go their way, but I think there's a little more to it. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credentialed media member, Trey Matthews. So, where do I begin? Well, let's start with the obvious. The Devils lost their latest matchup to the Florida Panthers by a score of 4-3. Now, I think it's safe to say that the start of the new year hasn't really gone as planned for the Devils because, let's face it, their last few games hasn't been their best brand of hockey. So let's go back to opening night against the Detroit Red Wings. From the opening faceoff, the Detroit Red Wings were by and large the better team. They were skating circles around the Devils. They were skating the Devils out of their own barn. But what happened? Jack Hughes and Vitek Vanacek took over. So Jack Hughes took over in period 2, and Vitek Vanacek stood tall in between the pipes throughout the entirety of the game. So I was like, okay, it's the first game of the year. There's bound to be some rust. I'm sure the Devils will play better against the Arizona Coyotes, a weaker opponent compared to the Red Wings. But then come the Coyotes game, that was probably one of the sloppiest games I had seen in a long time because the Devils had a lot of penalties. The Coyotes had a lot of penalties, especially in period 2. I lost track. I bet it was a nightmare up in the press box for some of the NHL official stat keepers and also the referees. But even though the Devils didn't play their best brand of hockey, they still walked away with the point. They lost in a shootout, but come this matchup against the Florida Panthers, I was a little nervous. I was like, these are the reigning Eastern Conference champions. But then I remembered they are 0-2 to begin their season, so they're also off to a slow start. I was like, okay, maybe the Devils can actually win against the Panthers despite playing sloppy the last couple games. Well, unfortunately, it was more or less the same. It was a bad start for the Devils. So in this episode, I'll share you guys some of my main takeaways from the overall game. And then in the second segment, I'll highlight some players. But spoiler alert, we're not looking at stars of the game. If anything, we're going to look at the complete opposite. We're going to look at some duds of the game. And quite honestly, some players are off to slow starts. And then in the final segment, like I do with any post-game recap, I will compare the stats and give the Devils a letter grade. So let's start with the obvious, which is the Devils once again got off to a really bad start. It seems like offensively, they're not connecting. Like something just seems a little off with their offensive attacks. They're not as fast. They're not as strategic. They're not as cohesive. And that's been brought up numerous times throughout the entirety of the broadcast because Ken Danico highlighted it alongside with Bill Spalding. So we'll talk more about that in segment 2. But some of the main glaring things I look at in terms of the Devils' bad start is not only their offensive execution, but their defensive lapses as well. So how did the Florida Panthers get their first goal of the game? It was thanks to Sam Reinhart. So Reinhart was more of in the right place, right time in the slot, but he was able to slip past both Siegenthaler and Hamilton, find a sliver of daylight, and find the back of the net on Vitek Vanacek. Then when we look at the second goal led up by the Devils, Carter Verhaeghe, he capitalized on a Brendan Smith blunder. So what had happened was that Smith found the puck, was trying to clear it, and he whiffed at it. He missed everything. Verhaeghe pounced on it, and he had a backhander attempt on Vanacek, and it was a soft goal led up by Vitek. Now, I'm sure Vitek would have liked to have that one back because I've seen him make those types of saves before, but I can't put all the blame on the Devils' goalie. I got to put the blame on Brendan Smith because quite honestly, that was a little bit of a brain fart from Smith because he saw the puck in his sights and he just swung at nothing but air particles. So it's not just the offensive execution, which has dearly been lacking, but it's also some of those defensive lapses. So I know last year, one of the biggest narratives for the Devils was that they were the never say die team, as in they were the team that could mount a comeback and come away with the win. In fact, I think they led the entire NHL last season with comeback victories. But the problem is that that's usually a recipe for disaster. That's not how Stanley Cup caliber teams formulate. So my thing is like the Devils need to dominate from start to finish. Now, let's talk about one of the bigger plays that I think a lot of people are talking about, which was the no tripping call on Dawson Mercer. So what had happened was it was late in period 3. The Devils had an extra attacker, so they have 6 skaters on the rink, and then here comes Mercer penetrating in on the offensive end for the Devils, and then former Devil Dmitry Kulikov got underneath his skates, tripped him up, but we played on. The referees did not blow their whistle. They did not assess a penalty to the Panthers, and that could have put the Devils on the 6-on-4 advantage. And the Devils were red hot in period 3. Like, they flipped a switch. They were playing much better, and I'll talk about that momentarily. But a lot of people are pissed off that the referees missed that blatant call. And honestly, you're not wrong. You have every right to be furious because the referees missed it point blank range. I looked at the replay several times and I was like, did Kulikov actually miss Mercer's skates, and was he just trying to sell it, or what had happened? Did he just graze it a little bit? And I was like, nope, his stick was like fully underneath Mercer's skates, and that's what tripped him up. Mercer was not selling it. It was not a light tap. It was a full-blown tripping call that the referees decide not to call. Yes, that frustrates me. Yes, that should have been called. And yes, that could have put the Devils on the 6-on-4 advantage. Now, was there going to be any guarantee that the Devils were going to capitalize on that opportunity? I really don't know. I'm not a fortune teller. I'm not Sidekick. But the one thing I can say is that the Devils scored 2 of their 3 goals on the power play, thanks to Jesper Bratt late in period 3, and also a little earlier in the period, thanks to Erik Haula. There's no guarantee that the Devils capitalize on that hypothetical power play situation. But at the same time, this goes back to what I said moments ago. The Devils played excellent period 3 hockey. They played a good 20 minutes. But the problem is, like I just said, you got to dominate from start to finish. You got to get off to a good start. And had the Devils gotten off to a decent start, had they had their offense going, had they not made some of those defensive lapses, then quite honestly, that 6-on-4 advantage wouldn't have mattered. In fact, it wouldn't have even happened because the Devils wouldn't have to have pulled Vanacek to get the extra attacker on to try to get a quick goal and scramble for it. That wouldn't have happened. So my thing is, yes, the referees did miss that call. I am ticked off about it. They really missed it point blank. At the same time, you can't just chalk up this Devils loss on one particular play because it's a process. There's things that lead up to it. And unfortunately, the Devils put themselves into that situation. So the one thing I want to take away from this is that you can't trail a majority of the game and hope to come out victorious despite flipping a switch when there was minuscule time remaining. It doesn't work that way. And I know usually you want to take these games with a grain of salt because a lot of teams are rusty, because I just mentioned that the Panthers, who are the reigning Eastern Conference champions prior to this game, they were 0-2. So theoretically, they're off to a slow start. But at the same time, it's just like, you can't just make an excuse saying like, oh, it was just this one play that really ruined us. No, there's other things that led up to it. That's the point I'm trying to make, which is, yes, Kulikov did in fact trip him, and the Devils should have been rewarded a power play. But like I said, had they been good from start to hopefully finish, then it wouldn't have mattered in the first place. So that's my main takeaway. But my final thoughts on the game. The Devils played a good 20 minutes. And like I said, they did step up in period 3. So Erik Haula scored once more. Michael McLeod scored. Jesper Bratt scored. And by the way, shout out to Jack Hughes, because according to James Nichols of New Jersey Hockey Now, he said Jack Hughes now owns the Devils franchise record for the most points in the first 3 games of a single season with 7. So he has 2 goals and 5 assists. Alexander Holtz also picked up an assist. So shout out to him as well. A decent start to trying to showcase that he belongs. But digressing a little bit, the Devils really did step up in period 3 because they scored 3 unanswered goals on the Panthers and it looked like they were going to shock the NHL world once more. But the one thing I could say for Devils discourse, which is just be patient, because theoretically the Devils are off to a better start this year than they were last year, because after the first 3 games, the Devils only had 2 points because they lost the first 2 games, back-to-back 5-2 losses, and then they won their 3rd game against the Anaheim Ducks. So after 3 games, they had 2 points. Well, after 3 games this year, they have 3 points. So technically, that's moving forward. So think of it like this. When you fall flat on your face, you are moving forward in the grand scheme of things. So I think for the Devils, it's just that we got to be a little patient. And the same can be said just a few months back during the playoffs, which was the Devils got off to a very slow start in round 1 against the New York Rangers. They lost 5-2 in game 1 and game 2. People were saying that it was going to be an easy sweep for the Rangers. People were calling the Devils fraudulent. People were saying the Devils didn't belong there. But what happened? They shocked the NHL world once more, beating the Rangers in 7. So that's my thing, which is it's just been 3 games. Let's be patient. Let's not overreact. But we're going to have to talk about some players that are not really off to good starts. And like I said, I don't want to read too far into it, but it's something that we got to talk about because it's too important to just ignore. Okay, so one of the things that I alluded to in segment 1 was that this Devils team seems to have no chemistry, which is outside of Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt and also Dougie Hamilton, we're not really getting consistent point production from a lot of offensive players. Now, I'll give credit where credit is due. The 4th line for the Devils, which consisted of Curtis Lazar, Nathan Bash, and Michael McLeod, they were somewhat productive the first 2 periods. And Dawson Mercer seemed to have improved his skating just a little bit. But who am I talking about? Let's talk about that Nico Hischier line, because our captain and also Timo Meier, who was a main priority for the Devils to re-sign during the offseason, both of them are off to very putrid starts, and I'm sure they're kicking themselves for that. Here's what Nico Hischier has done so far after 3 games. He has no goals, no assists, no points, and he has a plus-minus of +1. He's not really producing, and he's not really doing well in the face-off department either, as acknowledged by Bryce Salvador during the telecast. So the one thing that Bryce said is that Hischier is in a bit of a funk, but he's just got to keep doing what he normally does, because once he gets that first point, once he starts winning more faceoffs, maybe he'll regain some confidence. So there's nothing more to be said than just the fact that Hischier's just got off to a pretty slow start, but maybe he can get it going once he gets that first goal or that first assist. But we know that Hischier's really good. It's just a matter of he's got to just break out of his own funk. I think he's just in his head a little bit, and I think that's what Bryce was kind of hinting at during the telecast, which is it happens to the best of players. Players are going to go through rough stretches. We saw with Jack Hughes towards the end of last season, and now we're seeing it with Nico Hischier. So I think for Nico, he's going to be just fine. Yes, he's off to a slow start, but let's talk about Timo Meier, his other line partner, because Timo has disappointed a lot of Devils fans to the point where they're like, you got to switch back to 96 because 28 ain't working for you, pal. Because here's the thing about Timo Meier going into this matchup. So according to, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Daniel Omoya, he's a Devils writer for the Hockey Writers. He said, in terms of forwards, Timo Meier has been the worst on the team with a 35.7 Corsi for percentage. His entire line, Meier, Hischier, Mercer, are the only 3 forwards below 50%. Pretty shocking. So Meier is not producing all that well. And keep in mind, that stat is a little outdated, but I'm sure it's got a little worse because that was prior to this matchup against the Panthers. So Meier so far this season, more or less the same for Hischier. He has 0 goals, 0 assists, 0 points, plus-minus a +0. But I think the biggest thing that is irking a lot of Devils fans is that in this game against the Panthers, he got a couple of inopportune penalties that did not help New Jersey. So that's what people are a little frustrated with. Now, if you guys recall, a few episodes ago, I talked about some of my bold takes for this Devils team. And I said, I don't anticipate for Meier to be a 40-goal scorer. I just want to make the record clear. This is not what I had in mind. Okay, I didn't expect for him to be like putrid. I didn't expect for him to like stink up the joint. That's not what I was hoping for. But I think for Timo, it's more or less the same for Hischier, which is some players are just bound to get off the slow starts, but they just need to shake it up just a little bit more. Now, unfortunately for Meier, alongside with John Marino and Curtis Lazar, in the third period, he was benched. And Lindy Ruff did reveal during his post-game interview that all of the benchings that he made were coach's decisions. So he saw that Meier, Marino, and Lazar weren't really cutting it for him. And he said prior to the game that he will make a drastic change if he has to. Now, I applaud that for Lindy, which is you see the problem and you're just trying to like hold people accountable, because at the start of period 2, we saw the Devils change up their lines a little bit. So we saw Mercer be brought up to the Nico Hischier and Andre Palat line, and then Meier was brought down. But the one thing that I want to highlight for Meier is that if you look at his total ice time against the Red Wings, he was close to 17 minutes. Against the Coyotes, he was 17 and a half minutes. And then in this game against the Panthers, 11 and a half minutes. So his ice time has gone down significantly compared to the Coyotes game and the Panthers game because he's not cutting it. So just to put that out there a little bit more. Now, obviously, I've talked about a couple players that have been somewhat putrid for the Devils. Now, I think a lot of you are going to be pointing the finger at Brendan Smith on that second goal that was let up. And I literally just dissected it and talked about like, yeah, Smith had a bit of a blunder. And a lot of you are still wondering, why is Smith still in the lineup? Well, according to Daniel once more from the Hockey Writers, he said going into the Panthers game, Brendan Smith has been solid for the Devils so far. He's the second best defenseman on the team in Corsi with a 62.5 Corsi for percentage. The team has generated 30 chances with him on the ice and given up 18. And then Daniel did the asterisk duck because he knew that a lot of Devils fans might be a little ticked off by it. So, yes, Smith made a mistake in this game, but honestly, I think he is one of the lowest priorities for the Devils right now. He's the least of our concerns in this matchup against the Panthers, if I'm being completely honest. So, as you guys know, I'm going to be the first one to ridicule Smith. I'm going to be the first one to say, like, look, he's a great leader in the locker room, but on the sheet of ice, he's not all that effective. But just putting that out there going into the matchup against the Panthers, he was actually somewhat solid. And it goes back to what Lindy Ruff said about Eric Haula earlier this year, which is the team gets more possession and thus gets more chances with a certain player on the rink. And in this case, it's Brendan Smith. So I'm just putting that into the light, and I'll let you guys make your own decisions regarding Smith and how the Devils should utilize him going forward. Now, here's my thing on chemistry and the players not really producing. Chemistry is not an easy science. Hockey is so weird because a player that might be considered a top 6 player on one team might not even see the light of day if he was playing for a different team. So let's look at an example on the Devils roster. Let's look at Nathan Bastian. Bastian is very useful for the Devils. And I said this over the summer, he doesn't really stick out in any particular category. But yet when he goes down with an injury, the Devils tend to struggle. And the 5-on-5 numbers show that when he's out there on the rink, he's making an impact. But yet when Bastian was playing with the Seattle Kraken after he was selected by them during their expansion draft, he didn't really produce all that much. In fact, his tenure with the Kraken was pretty forgettable. So it goes to show you how weird hockey is in terms of line combinations, in terms of chemistry, because it varies team to team. It varies player to player because some players might not like each other, but they put their differences aside and they team up and play the full 60 together, and they're able to help their team win games. Or there might be some players that are buddy-buddy, and unfortunately, that chemistry doesn't really translate onto the sheet of ice. So it's just very complex when it comes to chemistry. It's not an easy science. It's not an easy fix. So the only thing I can say is that Lindy Ruff has just got to see which line combinations work and which ones need changing. And he did reveal during his post-game interview that he's going to look at like everything meticulously and he's going to see what's best for the team. Now, like I said in segment 1, I don't want to overreact to anything because it's still very early in the season. And I'm no coach, I'm no general manager, but if I had to give a suggestion, and take this with a grain of salt if you would, when we're looking at the line combinations, and this is something that I discussed during the summer, I think you got to put Timo Meier on the same line as Jack Hughes, and then put Tyler Toffoli on the same line as Nico Hischier for a couple of reasons. So for Jack Hughes, players are going to be gunning for him. He's no longer the underdog player. And we saw this in the game against the Detroit Red Wings, which is why he picked up a couple penalty minutes, because he was trying to defend himself from Mo Seider, because Mo Seider was coming full steam ahead. Seider is a big body. Remember a couple seasons ago in which Jeremy Lawson of the Kraken at the time shoved Hughes into the boards, and then Hughes was sidelined for a few months. I think Hughes was getting flashbacks to that particular play. So when he sees a big body like Seider coming down the lane below the goal line, he has to do whatever it takes to protect himself. And as a result, it costed Hughes a seat in the penalty box. And then the second time that Hughes had to sit in the penalty box, Jake basically holding him down with his stick. Hughes got up, gave him a little tap from his stick, and then the referees immediately blew their whistle and told Hughes to sit. So Hughes was just trying to defend himself. And we saw a little bit of this in the Coyotes game as well. So my thing is, the point I'm just trying to make, long story short version, is that Timo Meier can protect Jack Hughes in a sense. And we saw this sort of work during the playoffs, which is Hughes can do his thing, but Meier can protect him. Meier can work his way in front of the net, and Hughes can find him because Hughes is a wizard with the puck. And Hughes is on a great point streak. Now, I know it's a bit of a risk because, like I said, that line that consists of Toffoli, Hughes, and Bratt has been the only line that's been producing consistently for the Devils. But you got to switch things up a little bit for the sake of the team, like I said. And then for Tyler Toffoli, he's a veteran player. He's capable of putting up some decent points. Maybe he can help out Nico Hischier in a sense, because we saw Toffoli sort of help out Hughes already. And like Eric Holla said months back, Hughes doesn't really need that much help in the grand scheme of things. So, like I said, those are just some minor tweaks that I would make to the roster. I think you got to put Meier with Hughes because we've seen it work before. And I think Toffoli can help out Nico in a sense. But like I said, the thing about chemistry is that it's not an easy fix. It's not an easy science. It's just something that develops over time. And after so-and-so reps, teams start to figure it out. And for the teams and players that aren't able to figure out, that's why you have the trade deadline. That's why you have the offseason to try to shake things up. But it's not going to get to that point for the Devils, or I really hope not. That's like really worst case scenario. But those are just some of my quick thoughts after hearing Bill Spalding, Ken Danico, and also Bryce Salvador talk about it during the MSG telecast. It just got me thinking a little bit. And I was just like, okay, if I was Lindy, here's what I would just change a little bit. But like I said, it's not just those two lines. It's just throughout the entirety of the Devils lineup. But just start small, start with baby steps. But like I said, it's early on in the season. Don't want to overreact to anything. So we'll see what happens. Now, before I compare the stats and give the Devils a letter grade, I want to tell you guys about eBay Motors. So passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And now, let me tell you guys about the Sleeper app, because I'm in the middle of my fantasy football season. But let's face it, Jack Hughes scores a hat trick, Devils win the Stanley Cup, and if you want to win 100 times your money, play daily fantasy hockey on the Sleeper app. Because like I said, I'm in the full swing for fantasy football, but I'm down for some fantasy hockey. All these things that I just listed are possible scenarios for the season, but to have a chance at winning big, you need to play daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. As the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network, Sleeper is our top choice for our daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. So Jack Hughes, once again, getting a hat trick. Nico Hischier possibly winning the Selke, whatever the case might be. With studs like Hughes, Hischier, Brandt, Meier, all you need to do is pick more or less on stats for these stars. Choose the stats like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more. You heard me. Devils, 100-time payouts on Sleeper to start paying attention and get your picks right so you can win big. So use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL. Make sure you check out Sleeper's terms of use for details. Okay, so like I do with every post-game recap, let's look at the stats and I will give the Devils a letter grade. So shots on goal differential, 34-30 in favor of the Devils. Face-off percentage, 51.6% in favor of the Panthers, 48.4% in favor of the Devils. Power play. This goes back to what I was saying in segment 1 in regards to Dawson Mercer not being given a trip call thanks to Kulikov and Devils not going on the 6-on-4 power play. The Devils were 2 for 5 in their power play opportunities. Panthers were 1 for 4. Hits, 32-25 in favor of the Devils. Blocks, 22-9 in favor of the Panthers. So once again, the Devils really surprised me in period 3 because they were trying to mount a comeback, and it seemed like they had some decent momentum going their way, but it goes back to what I said, which is you need to get off to a good start, you need to have a good middle, and you need to have a good finish. So sometimes you're able to recover from it, and unfortunately, this is the 3rd time in a row that the Devils start off the game trailing and have to try to mount a comeback. I would like to see the Devils score the first goal of the game and go off and running, but we'll have to wait and see and see if they can actually get it done. But like I said, the record is 1-1-1. It's not as bad as it could have been, and technically they are improving compared to last season. Will they win 13 straight games at one point? I don't really think so. I don't foresee it. That's a really hard thing to do. It's hard to top a historic season. But like I said, guys, early on in the season, let's not read too far into it. I'm sure they're going to get it done. And it's one of the X factors I talked about going into season, which is sometimes chemistry is a hard thing to form, especially when you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And the Devils have a lot of talent on their roster. Now it's just about finding that balance. So if I had to give the Devils a letter grade, I'm going to give them a solid C because for one of a few factors. 1, still early in the season. 2, they did try to mount a miraculous comeback, so at least they didn't give up. And 3, there's still some positive takeaways to get from all this. Like, once again, Devils 2 for 5 in their power play, and also it's just like we're seeing some great offensive production from Jack Hughes still, Dougie Hamilton, Jesper Bratt. So there's still some decent momentum going into the next matchup for the Devils. So let me know what you guys think about this game. What do you think about the first 3 games for the Devils so far? And what would you change if you were Lindy Ruff? Because Ruff has said that he's going to look at everything meticulously and make some decisions that are best for the team. And I'm glad that he's holding players accountable. But as for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.